Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. This podcast episode discusses the details of domestic violence. If this episode becomes triggering while you are listening, practice self-care and turn off the episode. If you need to talk to someone, 1-800-799-7233. All the links are provided in the show notes.
Hi, everyone. This is Brenda J. Welcome to Real People, Real Voices, where people get to have a voice, and some for the first time. These are mini podcasts that focus on healing. I am so excited. So without further ado, let's get started.
When Jessica had first, me and her have talked, when Gilbert reached out to do their DV night, I was kind of nervous about it just because I've talked a lot about my addiction, but domestic violence, I felt like it was a lot harder for me to talk about. I wanted to do it because I think it's important to share your story.
Right.
So
it definitely is.
Sometimes the hardest things for us to do once we work through it is the most rewarding.
Right.
So
100% agree.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Karen W. Today we have Maggie on the show. Brenda and I heard Maggie share a little of her story of abuse at an event with Winged Hope, and we are honored that she agreed to share with our listeners. So welcome to the show, Maggie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad you could be here. Hi, this is Brenda. Do you mind sharing a little of your story of abuse?
No, of course not. So I think it's important to start, at the very beginning. I met my ex-husband when I was 15, and he was a lot older than me. So when we did start dating a little bit after that, it was a secret. But at the time, I didn't realize there was anything wrong with that. So at first, I thought it was exciting and thrilling. And so when we started dating, now looking back, I feel like I was just so young and I didn't really see any red flags. When I was spending time with him, he made me feel like I was the most important girl in the world, and I was smart and I was beautiful and I was kind and all of these things. And it was thrilling. It was exciting. But again, a lot of it had to be a secret. So that went on for a while, and I got to the point where I was trying to juggle the life of a normal teenager, being involved in sports, doing well in school, spending time with family and friends. And then I had this huge secret where it was like I was living this double life. Those two worlds started to almost collide, and I started seeing things that he didn't want me to spend time with any of my male friends. And whenever things would arise, like school dances and school events, it was, well, I can't be there, so I don't want you to go kind of thing. And I didn't go. It eventually started coming out. My family was extremely against it, and I tried hiding it from them to the point where I couldn't hide it anymore, and I left home. So I moved in with him. I finished school and things seemed to be going well. I got a job and, I was excited because we got our first place, and I felt like I was this adult that had full control. And after defending my ex-husband, I really was excited for the opportunity to prove that I was right, prove that our relationship was everything it was supposed to be. Shortly after we moved into our own place, we met another couple friends, and then we started having people over. That started leading into self-medicating behavior. So we started drinking a lot of alcohol and using THC. And I remember the first night it got physical and we were extremely intoxicated. We had some friends over, and me and him got into this huge explosive argument. And I remember him hitting me. And then I remember going into the shower and just crying and crying, and then him crying and him begging me it would never happen again and give him another chance and all of these things. And I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I had bruises all up and down my arms. And one particular is just this bite mark on my arm. But I didn't think twice about it. I gave him another chance and tried hiding it, tried acting like, everything was fine. And later that day, I went to pick up one of the friends that were over the night before, one of my girlfriends, and she saw the bruise and she questioned it. And she asked to be taken home. So I took her home, and that was the last time I spoke to her because I felt like if she knew the secret, then she was going to tell someone, or, I felt like it was jeopardizing my relationship. So I cut her out. And that continued for about a year and a half, 2 years. And we'd be drinking, and then slowly I started losing those friends. It was only a certain group of friends that would come over, and it was almost like the moment we'd start getting into an argument, they would leave, and they never brought it up. They never questioned why we'd get into an argument, or if ever it turned physical. And it did. A few times it turned physical. And then I found out I was pregnant. So I felt like when I found out I was pregnant, I started repairing that relationship with my family, and we ended up moving in with them, and things seemed to get a little bit better. We weren't using substances anymore, or so I thought. I wasn't using substances. He had told me he wasn't, but he was, and was no longer using just like alcohol or THC, but then it turned into narcotics. But he hid that from me. And then when I was pregnant with our oldest, we come from very religious families, very different religions, but very religious families. And he and I decided that we shouldn't have this baby out of wedlock. So we got married with just me and him present. And then it was through his church. And it was like this secret, this hush hush thing. And I didn't tell anyone because I knew that it would cause problems. So when I was pregnant, there was no physical violence. There was lying, there was manipulation, there was this. I had become, because I stopped working, I'd become 100% solely financially dependent on him. And then right before we had the baby, we all moved. My family and us moved into this property. And then I had my oldest, and things started becoming extremely hostile. I almost remembered thinking like, regretting the move. Like somehow the house was the cause of it. In reality, it was the amount of narcotics he was taking, the lying, all of it. And we took a trip with our oldest to California one year. And I remember seeing these signs. And it was at the breaking point where I was going through our belongings, and he got so mad at me and, calling me every name in the book. And I found out that he was using these narcotics. So I kind of gave him this ultimatum of, go get help when we get back to Phoenix or we're done. So we got back to Phoenix and I brought him to get help. And, I thought he had every intention to do so. Come to find out, he played the part until I had left the parking lot of that hospital and left and hung out with friends and came home and said he was all better. And then I found out shortly after that we were pregnant with our second son. And I almost looked again at like, okay, this pregnancy, it's like a sign that there's better things to come.
So was that the turning point or?
No. So we had our second son. Things continued to elevate. I started to use along with him after our oldest children were born. And then he was arrested. DCS got involved in our life, and looking back at it now, as hard as it was for me and as hard as it was for my children, and that's the number one thing is how hard it was for them. I ended up getting clean because of it, and he went to prison and then got home, and he was clean, and we got our custody back of our children, and we got our own place. And at this point, I had our daughter, our youngest child, and we were doing good. I got a really good job. He was working, and, everything seemed to be going good until he started coming home again and becoming extremely aggressive, possessive, calling me every name in the book, controlling me again with that financial aspect of it too. And I saw the signs, he ended up relapsing, and I didn't want that lifestyle anymore. I didn't want to be hurt anymore. I didn't want to be put down anymore. I didn't want to be controlled anymore. And I knew that if I stayed, I would end up relapsing too. And I don't know how long I would have been able to, they say like you either end up like dead in jail or hospitalized, right? Institutionalized. And I didn't want that for myself. So I left.
How did you end up getting out of the relationship?
I have a huge support system. My family, I went to them after one night it was exceptionally bad. And I remember like FaceTiming my mom, and she came over and the police came over. And when they got there, they asked me for my story, and I lied to them. And my mom and I sat down, and I told her I can't do this anymore. And so we came up with a plan. And then I went to work the next day, and I talked to my boss, and I ended up leaving work to go get a restraining order. So I got a restraining order, and then me and my children ended up staying in a hotel for 5 days until that restraining order was able to be served.
How many years were you married?
We were married 9 years, together for 13, 14 years. This was my very first everything, my first boyfriend, my first kiss, my first serious relationship. He was my first everything. So back to me leaving, I left. We stayed in a hotel, and that restraining order was served. At that point, I couldn't live in that place anymore. Me and my 3 kids, and we went through the divorce process. And in the divorce, I had sole custody. I have sole custody of the kids, and he had supervised visits. So, and then on specific like holidays. So it was Father's Day. He was at his parents' house, and I dropped my kids off, the understanding like, okay, his parents are home. They're going to help him with the kids, kind of supervise that visit. And then they're going to have dinner with him and his dad. And then I will pick them up tomorrow. And an hour after me dropping them off, I got a call from him saying, I need to get to the hospital. It's an emergency. And he told me my daughter had swallowed a quarter. Fortunately, I wasn't that far from the hospital. I get to the hospital, and I was kind of confused because my oldest swallowed a quarter when he was a little bit older than her. So I don't understand why, like, the urgency. So I walked in, and there was a hospital, like, waiting area full of the police. So I hear my daughter screaming, and I get pulled aside by the doctor. And he was like, do you know what happened? And I'm like, well, I was told she swallowed a quarter. I don't understand what's happening or what's going on. And he said that my daughter had access somehow fentanyl, and she overdosed, and her heart stopped beating for 5 minutes. And, they had got her back, but she was 2 at the time. Her little baby heart just stopped. So they had gotten her back, and she was admitted to the ICU. And I had my friend that I was with go pick up my children from their grandparents' house and bring them to their house. And I knew then that I left the marriage because I wanted a better life for my children and myself. And never in my wildest dreams can I imagine what happened to my daughter happening. And I knew right then it's done. I want no contact with their dad, my ex-husband. And I was at a really hard, low place when this happened, in a scared place. And Gilbert PD and I had been communicating because all of this happened in Gilbert. That's when Wing Hope reached out to me. And
yeah, that was going to be my next question. So yeah, that's how we met you, at that Winged Hope function. And we know Winged Hope and Gilbert Police played a big part in your safety and your road to healing. Can you talk about how Winged Hope has helped you and your children?
Yeah. So when that happened, like I said, I was in a very scared, low place. And so they reached out. They had sent these books to read, and then they met with me, and I was terrified. I didn't know, just there's so many emotions going through me. And I met with them. I met with Jessica, and she helped me and my kids get into counseling. So that was like a huge step in the road to recovery, which I'll be forever grateful for. So they helped me with counseling and books. And even now, like if there's a little bit after that, like a year after that, I was going through kind of a hard time. I was anxious about everything. And I remember calling them and them just, being there, which I truly appreciated.
What are some other things you've done to heal? I'm sure counseling was healing. And can you say some other things you did to help heal?
Yeah, so I really focus on self-care. So I really love doing certain things. And those things like include being outside. So camping, hiking, paddleboarding during the summer. I mean, those things really, they help me with my self-care. So along with the counseling, I kind of found something that I do just for me to help me feel like myself, which I hadn't felt like myself in such a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I love spending time outside too. So, what's one gold nugget that you could share with our listeners that may inspire them on their healing journey?
Just to keep going. I know that sounds like a very broad statement, but for me personally, there were so many times I questioned everything. There's just a voice inside my head that made me doubt every decision when I got out, when I was making these steps to heal myself and my children. So I would say is just to keep going, keep pushing because it's so much better. There's so much more to life than living, in that constant fear.
So how long has it been since you've been out of that relationship?
Our divorce was in 2020. So this December will be 4 years.
Okay. Wow. So yeah, it sounds like you've really come a long ways.
Yeah, that was just horrible. That must have been really hard. So,
Yeah.
we appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. We want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and being brave enough to share your story because it is very difficult. I know to share those painful things. We know it's healing for all of us and to share our stories and it's healing for our listeners. So we just thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.